Alright, after spending a good few hours with Cairn, I feel like my hands are tired in real life. Not because I fought 10 bosses tired, but more because I made 100 tiny decisions and any one of them could have ended me kind of tired. This is a climbing game that isn't about jumping from ledge to ledge, it's about reading rock, managing fear, and deciding what you're willing to sacrifice for a summit that's always visible, and always indifferent. Cairn's a single-player climbing and survival adventure game from the Game Bakers. You play Ava, a seasoned climber attempting to become the first person to climb and summit Mount Kami. The studio calls it a survival climber, which is accurate. Climbing is the main verb, but it's stitched to resource management, route planning, weather, injury, and the slow psychological grind of continuing upward. You start with climbs that feel like training, not because they're easy, but because the game is teaching you how it thinks, and the early sections are about learning to trust surfaces, recognise usable holds, and internalise how Ava moves when she's stable versus when she's hanging on by a thread. Then, somewhere a few hours in, Cairn stops feeling like levels and starts feeling like a real expedition, and you're not simply clearing obstacles anymore, you're actually building a route and a plan. Do you spend precious time and stamina going a safe way? Do you place protection or save it for the next wall? And do you stop at this bivouac spot to cook and recover, or push on through and risk fatigue at the worst possible time? The best part is how the game makes these choices feel continuous. There's no menu time and then action time. It's all one thing. And your survival decisions happen while you're still hearing wind, still watching the rock face, and still moving hand over hand most of the time. Mechanically, Cairn lives and dies on its climbing system, and the good news is it's the reason you play. Instead of magnetising Ava to obvious yellow paint climb routes, you're reading the wall and placing limbs in a sequence, and the game pushes you into thinking like a climber, with balance, body position, reach and micro rests. In practice, you're often making a chain of tiny physical yes-no decisions, one hand, then a foot, then a shift of weight, trying to avoid that moment where the wall tells you no. One of my favourite design choices, the game doesn't rely on an overt gamey stamina bar as the primary communication. Instead, it leans hard on performance cues, breathing, strain, posture, tremors, and panic, so you end up reading Ava the way that you read the rock. And this is both immersive and cruel, because it means sometimes you don't realise you're in trouble until you're already bargaining with gravity. And yes, this game is punishing, but not mindlessly so. The punishment usually feels like a logical consequence of impatience or sloppy planning, and that's the special sauce. You don't just fail in this game, you learn a new rule for the mountain. By halfway through my playthrough, the survival layer started asserting itself more. You're managing food, water, rest, and supplies, plus the climbing essentials like protection and tools. Camps and abandoned spots become more tempting because they offer gear or materials. However, they cost time and energy to reach safely. And Cairn loves forcing trade-offs that are painful in a very human way. Do you scavenge equipment that might save you later? Or do you prioritise immediate recovery so you can survive the next stretch? Bivouac breaks are also where you feel the game's pacing philosophy. They're not just checkpoints, they're breathing spaces, where the climb becomes reflective. You cook, recover, read messages, listen to the mountains settle around you, and then you step back onto the wall with your stomach full and your nerves reset, knowing the game will happily take that comfort away again in minutes. Visually, Cairn is stylised but grounded, and it doesn't chase photorealism, it chases legibility and mood. The mountain is the star. Rock faces have a readable language, textures and shapes that communicate what's climbable, what's risky, and what's a trap, without turning into neon game signposting. And the vistas are weaponised. You get these moments of breathtaking scale that immediately make you aware of your insignificance. It's not just pretty, it's thematic reinforcement. But there's also a loneliness baked into the compositions. Even when you're in places that suggest human presence, old camps, traces of other climbers, The framing keeps pulling your eye back to the sheer vertical problem in front of you. The world feels handcrafted around one central idea, that the mountain doesn't care about you, but it will let you try. Audio might be Cairn's secret superpower. A lot of the time the soundtrack is basically just the mountain, with wind, weather, small environmental details, and crucially, Ava's voice and breathing. The game makes you live in that physical strain, and when she slips, when she panics, when she's in pain, it's not background flavour, it's real feedback. But there's also an adaptive sound design approach that emphasises the mountain's presence, shifting how intimidating the environment feels depending on what you're facing and focusing on. It sounds subtle, but in play it becomes psychological. You hear the wall as a threat, not just see it. And then when the music finally does arrive, it matters. The score is a collaboration between Martin Stig Andersen, Gildar, and the Toxic Avenger, and the key is restraint. Music doesn't smother the climb. It appears like a reward, or a lifeline, or maybe even a momentary permission to feel hope. Story in Cairn is not cutscene every 10 minutes. In the first 10 hours, it's more like presence and pressure building in the background. Ava's competent, driven and guarded. Communication with the outside world through calls, messages, sponsor expectations and check-ins creates this steady tension between human society and the raw purity of the climb. The mountain's simple, up or down, but people are messy with expectations, guilt, pride, identity, and the need to be witnessed. Importantly, the narrative supports the gameplay fantasy. This isn't a heroic power trip, it's much closer to a study of obsession and resilience, where every gain costs something, be it time, safety, supplies, maybe even relationships. Even early on, the game asks what success actually means, when the process is grinding you down. If Cairn has a philosophical thesis, it's this: the summit is a fact and not a promise. And you can feel influences from serious mountaineering stories, especially work like The Summit of the Gods, where climbing is treated as a confrontation with self, not an adventure activity. But I think that's only accurate in one narrow way. The game is demanding, and failure teaches you. But the vibe is different. It's more existential logistics, like you're not mastering attack patterns, but you're mastering your own impatience. There are motifs that come through strongly though. Things such as the human fragility versus indifferent nature. Freedom as responsibility, because choosing your route means owning your consequences. And the psychology of perseverance, continuing not because it's wise, but because it's yours. Ultimately, Cairn feels like a game with a singular mission. Make climbing feel physical, strategic, emotional, and occasionally terrifying. If you want constant novelty, fast rewards, or power fantasy progression, then this might bounce off you pretty hard. But if you want a game that makes you slow down intentionally, to plan, listen, and earn every meter, then Cairn is kind of incredible. The mountain is absolutely gorgeous, and the sound design is oppressive but in the best way possible. And the climbing system itself turns every wall into a puzzle that you solve with your body. And the wild part is that the summit isn't even the point. The point is who you become, or what you give up trying to reach it. Thank you for joining me for this review of Cairn. I'd love to hear your comments on the game below if you've played it. Please like, subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.